Welcome back to this edition of Insights. I'm joined by ACC Professor of Political Science Tim Kuhnlein, and we're just discussing the Affordable Care Act. We're talking about how it's not really plausible for the Republicans in power to destroy the entire piece of legislation. So where do you think they're going to take it?
I don't think popular sentiment will allow it. The political repercussions would be grave. They're going to probably couch this in a way that they probably will dismantle it in terms of repealing it, but institutionalize something that looks very similar but is oriented towards their philosophical agenda, what's acceptable to them, and really does hopefully improve upon the ultimate goal, and that is making healthcare more affordable. The problem with that is, in order to do that, you have to start thinking about limitations, caps, and Medicare is the kind of the example of the problem that we're going to run into. The proposals coming from Tom Price and other Republicans are that, the Medicare problem requires an opt-out. Doctors want to opt out because they don't want to have to comply to the limitations that Medicare places on what they charge. Well, herein lies the problem. How do we control the inflation of the industry? And government setting price controls and all that stuff is maybe not the most desirable thing, but how else do we do this? Competition, okay, maybe. That's the insurance side of the equation, but the services side is another issue. So there's going to be some jockeying here. We've been given some indication now that we know who the Secretary of Health and Human Services secretary will be, Tom Price. You can kind of get a sense of the types of things that will probably be added to any new health reform legislation. They're talking a lot about age adjustments, using tax credits to sort of limit the amount of money that government has to put out to finance any program. But then the question becomes one of, well, is it enough for people to actually afford the service? Yeah. But at least it limits government's liability. Does it fix the problem? We'll see. HSAs, this is about discouraging use fundamentally. And it can be somewhat effective in making people think twice about what they do to help curb costs. But again, if you don't have the money to put into the HSA, where's
You're basically not covered.
Right. And then grants, there's a lot of talk about block granting for states and certain populations so that we define a certain amount of money and that's it, and it subsidizes, but is it sufficient? And then doing that, particularly with high-risk pools, there's a lot of room probably in the existing legislation from all things considered to make some progress there. But again, it's all about how much money is available and does it really help the population. There's talk about association plans for business and professional groups to do group policies and things of that sort. Probably legislation related to medical malpractice, loosening up those obligations or liabilities for medical personnel, doctors, and so forth. These are just some indications of what could be added. Well, this on top of allowing for the sale of insurance across state boundaries, which would create a level of competition.
I think that's probably the biggest thing they're going to focus on is opening up that competition.
Yeah, Trump, that's what he highlights.
Right, and that will lower the premium costs, I guess, for the recipients of it.
Yeah, and then Trump has also been pretty forthright about protecting Medicare. So how these two discussions, the Affordable Care Act for non-Medicare and the revisions of Medicare, how that all relates to one another, they're kind of a mirror image. And of course, others are suggesting we should just have a single-payer system or a system that is an expansion of Medicare for everyone, so that you can manage it.
So not just seniors, but have kind of that same idea for system for the general public.
Right.
But that would kind of limit that would have no competition in that case.
It depends on how it would be structured, of course. According to the current model, right, you have one insurer essentially, but you have access to private services. But then, see, that's where the other side of the aisle argues, well, but there are price limits, and doctors don't necessarily want to comply with that. Their costs are higher. And this is the crux of the problem. How do we manage all of this and control the inflation of an industry that is probably one of the most inflated industries in our economy?
And so when we have, one party controlling every aspect of government in Washington starting in January, are they able to basically do whatever they want with something like this?
No, because any change to this law, of course, will require an ability in the Senate to stop a filibuster. So the Republicans will need a 60-vote total to essentially stop the legislation from being stalled that would come out of the House, for example, and before it ever reaches the president. And then the president could always put pressure back on. So in some respects, the one-party directive of this could actually help winnow out a clarification, much like the creation of the initial legislation was done by one party. I just hope, and I think many among me hope that that the other side of the aisle will be heard, and that we won't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can find a more workable solution to the core problem, and that is affordability for a greater number of people.
And it's going to be interesting to see what happens, obviously, with Trump taking over and kind of looking to improve upon what's called Obamacare and maybe make it his own.
Right. And maybe we can get away from the proper names.
Sounds good. Thank you, Tim. And thank you for joining us. There's going to be more insights next week at the same time, same place, so stay tuned.
Insights into Northeast Michigan is produced by WBKB News. If you have any comments, suggestions, or topics you would like to see on a future show, please email WBKB News. This has been a production of Thunder Bay Broadcasting Corporation. All rights reserved.